And we begin with the war in Ukraine, which has now taken on a drastically different dimension. No longer is it a border conflict centering on the so called breakaway republics in the east. Overnight, Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered a military operation targeting the entire Ukrainian government. Airstrikes were reported across the country, including in the capital city of Kiev. Russia says it has knocked out Ukraine's air defenses and air bases. The Ukrainian foreign minister reported that hundreds of soldiers were killed in the initial wave of Russian attacks. Also, reports of Russian troops invading from Belarus, which would implicate yet another country in this disaster. Moscow claims it is only targeting military positions and posts. However, there are numerous reports of bombed out residential areas and civilian casualties. It is very difficult to confirm anything happening right now in this exceedingly chaotic environment, especially from this newsroom. Suffice to say, what is happening is very sad, and like in every war, it will be working class people who suffer the most, while capitalists far from the combat zone profit off the destruction. In case it needs to be said, Putin is no friend of the left. And the guy regularly talks shit about Lenin, so come on. We're witnessing a hostile move by an isolated head of state who happens to control the largest cache of nuclear weapons in the world. That complicates things. And Putin appears committed to this war despite the high toll it is already taking on the Russian economy. The Russian stock market down over 30% since the new wave of military strikes. The ruble is also crashing, and it will only get worse as the US and Europe impose new sanctions and as news trickles into the country of dead Russian soldiers fighting a war of aggression. Russia is to blame here, but we are also witnessing a failure of a foreign policy in the West that believed it could slowly bend Russia to its will, that the Putin government would eventually submit to all of its neighbors joining an adversarial military alliance from the Cold War. If the goal was to avoid war in Europe, and it's uncertain just how committed NATO is to that objective, but assuming that is still the goal, it has now failed. Just as State Department officials warned it would back in 2008 when they first reported on Russia's concerns about its neighbors joining NATO and predicted instability in the region. Now the goal absolutely has to be to end this war before more lives are lost and before this conflict spirals out of control. People wondered what it would be like to have Twitter during past historical world crises. Well, now we know. War still sucks the same amount, only there are awful memes about it now, too. Horrific situation in Texas where reactionaries are trying to get kids killed. Second most populated state in the nation has criminalized the identity of transgender children, making life-saving medical procedures for them illegal and even threatening to punish parents who pursue those procedures for their kids. In a letter released Wednesday, Governor Greg Abbott directed the state's Department of Family and Protective Services to investigate any reported cases of a child receiving gender-affirming procedures. Every major reputable medical organization in the country says such medical interventions are necessary and can save lives. But on Monday, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton said they are child abuse under state law. Governor Abbott using Paxton's opinion as a basis for his assault on transgender youth, calling on members of the community, including teachers and doctors, to report any suspicions regarding a child and family's healthcare choices, and if they don't, they could themselves be prosecuted. The state is trying to force people to snitch on kids, and not just any kids, the most vulnerable ones in their community. Grown-ass adults who spend way too much time thinking about the gender identity of teens and preteens are running the show in the Lone Star State. The most recent annual survey by the Trevor Project of LGBTQ youth found that 42% of respondents seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year. The number went up to over 50% among only transgender and non-binary young people. Thoughts of suicide correlated with facing discrimination. More than a third of kids who experienced discrimination attempted suicide, Among those who did not face discrimination, only 7% attempted suicide, which is still pretty high. The study also found that transgender and non binary youth who said people around them respected their pronouns attempted suicide at half the rate of those who did not. So, whether Republican leaders actually believe in this religious fascism project or are just cynically exploiting bigotry to win elections, whatever the story is, people will die as a result of this decision. More on Texas in just a little bit. Excuse my language for just a second, but how the fuck does this guy still have a job? 400 days into the Biden administration, and he still hasn't figured out a way to remove Postmaster General Louis DeJoy. No head of the post office has ever had a worse record when it comes to mail delivery than DeJoy, and we're talking going back all the way to Benjamin Franklin. The administration has moved slowly to add nominees to the Postal Board of Governors, the body that actually can fire DeJoy, since technically Joe Biden isn't allowed to do it. And those that have been appointed or nominated aren't interested in actually ousting DeJoy. And one of the nominees that's currently stalled in the Senate previously worked in the Office of Management and Budget for Donald Trump and once as a policy advisor for Mitch McConnell. So we're all still living with the decisions that DeJoy is making, including his latest, defying the White House and finalizing a plan to replace the post office's aging fleet of vehicles with a bunch of new gas guzzlers. The move immediately sabotages one of the administration's pledges to fight climate change, replacing all 600,000 vehicles in the federal fleet with electric ones by 2050. Transportation is a huge contributor to global warming. Electrifying the federal fleet would reduce the U.S. government's emissions by an estimated 65%. That won't happen, though, as long as post office vehicles, which make up over a third of all federal vehicles, recommit to combustion engines, a move that will ensure the continued burning of over 100 million gallons of fuel each year. So again, I ask, how the fuck does this guy still have a job? Hey, thanks for watching. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of our new videos. Also, if you want to see Means Morning News in its complete form, not just the clips we post here, head on over to Means TV and get access to all our new episodes and our entire backlog, plus tons of other great movies and original TV shows.